to cut you off, but here we go. So, all right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. For guests and visitors, my name is Steve Perley, Club President. I'd like to welcome you all to the 18th meeting of the 47th year of the Dublin Worthington Rotary Club. Today's invocation and pledge of allegiance will be offered by the one and only Tom Rice.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we pause to thank you for Doug Southgate and for all of our sisters and brothers in Rotary who have gifts and passions and wisdom to share. On this Veterans Day, we thank you too for our nation and for all of the veterans who have served and are serving courageously and sacrificially to defend us and our freedom. Bless our meeting today, we pray, and bless our ongoing ministry in Rotary. Amen.
Amen.
Hold on. Thought I had these pulled up.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Tom. President-elect Teresa, if there are any guests or visiting Rotarians. Yep. All right, we're good. Sergeant, also
Yes.
Teresa Russell.
Hello, everybody. Anybody have any happy dollars?
I do.
Celebrating my grandson's 16th birthday today. He is the 5th generation of Jacob boys that have lived in the northwest part of Franklin County since 1905. But the really good news is he'll be able to drive me to the golf course starting this Friday.
Sergeant,
Perfect.
he only put in a buck, and
Oh.
he's gonna get in the drive-by to drive to the golf course.
Oh, I'm glad the in charge sergeant is catching that. Cardinal, what's going on?
Right about that. Put that.
Half a dollar for Doug Southgate, because this is probably the first time he's been blessed by anyone other than his parents.
That is true.
Roger.
Got two.
Why did you come
His grandson, as you probably know, is an athlete grandson, and he spent all his schooling at Columbus Academy, K-12. The 5th grade teacher there has been following him on what he's happened at the academy. They're having a Zoom meeting tomorrow. The whole 5th grade at Columbus Academy. The second one is some of the people you know, my wife went in Kansas for 2 weeks ago. She came back all smiles from the doctor yesterday. I was gonna, it's not really a happy dollar, but maybe some of you saw in today's paper that Bill Wolford died. He was one of my wife's colleagues at the Worthington Hills School, and he's also one of the largest promoters of lacrosse in Central Ohio. Taught lacrosse to thousands of kids and put lacrosse on the map in Ohio.
Fantastic. Cardinal, do you have another one?
And this one's $5. On Friday, we go down to Orlando, Florida. My youngest son is getting married.
Oh. And I have happy dollars. Tomorrow, my daughter's Olympian Liberty High School volleyball team is going to Final Four.
Ooh.
All right.
We're in Dayton tomorrow and hopefully Dayton again on Saturday.
I have a happy dollar or two. One, I'm happy because I'm going to report to you that I spent the first 3 days of this week in New York City. And I can tell you that you cannot get into a restaurant without your vaccination card and a mask and your ID. And so I really felt safe because then I came back here yesterday and went into all kinds of restaurants and they didn't even ask me to put on a mask. The other thing is that as I reported to the executive committee this morning, and many of you probably already know, but Afghanistan is starting a 4-day event to try to immunize 3.3 million children who have not been inoculated for polio in the last 3 years for obvious reasons. And they start that now. So let's just hope and pray for those of you who pray that they can get all 3.3 million, because otherwise there's going to be an outbreak there.
And we have a happy dollar from Jim Miller.
Oh, I'm going to just reiterate Jerry's statement. It's great that we can move through Afghanistan, who has been the country who has had the most number of cases in the last few years. So I'll add 2 more to Jerry's.
Any more happy dollars?
One more happy dollar, and that's, folks know that Greg is the father, as you may know, of a 4-week-old daughter who has a screaming, loud soprano voice that Greg and Amy are led to starting at about 1 o'clock in the morning and going to about 4 o'clock in the morning. Then during the day, she sleeps and is very, very nice. So it's good to know that Greg is someplace probably, well, he's working, but he's someplace else right now, also trying to grab a nap and going home and trying to relieve his wife. I want you to know that you can beat up on him at any time.
Okay, tomorrow's Veterans Day. Does anybody know why we celebrate?
Armistice.
War ended on 11/11/11.
11th hour, 11th day in the 11th month. What year?
1918.
All right. That's all I got.
He was 20 years old.
So everybody else should put in a dollar. You didn't get it right.
Hey, Steve. Hey, Steve,
Yes, John.
can I ask, so Jerry, did you say Pakistan? Because Jim Miller said Afghanistan, and I know Afghanistan, the Taliban announced that they would open up to people that are doing polio vaccinations in Afghanistan. But Jerry, didn't you say Pakistan?
John, you should always think of what I meant to say, regardless of what I say. I thought you'd learned that already. So with that, you can put in a couple dollars and we'll bill you for that.
I say so. Pakistan was a code word for Afghanistan. Now I get it.
Did I say Pakistan?
No.
There's the jury has spoken. I did not say Pakistan.
Okay.
I'm glad we got that cleared up. And if somebody could tell my wife to, consider what I meant, not what I said, that would go a long way. I think that would help. So yes, before we get into announcements, I do want to, recognize Veterans Day. Obviously tomorrow is Veterans Day. It originated as Armistice Day on November 11th, 1919. It was first anniversary of the end of World War I. And Congress passed a resolution in 1926 for an annual observance. And November 11th became a national holiday beginning in 1938. And unlike Memorial Day, Veterans Day pays a tribute to all American veterans, living or dead, but especially gives thanks to living veterans who served their country honorably during war or peacetime. So if we have any veterans in the room, I'd like you to stand if you don't mind. The same with Zoom. Very much. Okay, now, some announcements. Peggy, do you have an announcement?
Got a couple. Let me just stand here.
Yeah, stand up.
Okay.
Can I hear on the Zoom?
Should be able to.
Is Connie on?
No.
The last report I talked to Connie is that she had her 4th chemo treatment last week. Got 2 more to go, and then she'll rest up before surgery. So if I hear anything else by next week, I'll let you know. Keep her in your prayers. My next thing is, do you know what this means, don't you, Rotary?
I do.
You know that? Okay. I've contacted Wilson Hill Elementary in Centero. They're sending me the names of the children that we're giving gifts to this year. I did get Wilson Hill. There's 4 children there, 14, 12, 4, and 2. And so normally we range between 6 and 8 children a year. So what I will do is I'll have those gift tags ready with the wish list on there by next week. So we can start picking those up, and somehow we'll get in touch with the people on Zoom too, so they can participate as well. And remember, we pick up some tags, buy the gifts for the children, wrap them and bring it back here, and then we deliver them to the schools and send here. Do I have any questions for this year? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements?
It's poinsettia time this month. We'll be selling poinsettias for the rest of the month. Last day for selling will be the 1st of December. Delivery to those who buy them will be on the 8th of December. We are anticipating that the plants will be delivered here sometime on Tuesday. Time to be determined, but you will need a few helping hands to unload the trucks. So as we get closer, I'll ask for more volunteers. As of this morning, when I checked the roster, we had already sold 178 plants. So we got a good start. We're on our way to 600. Teresa's has a stretch goal of 100. Let's see, Darnell's over there. He's good for at least 60, right?
Sure.
So for those of you who cannot buy them because your dogs chew them up or you don't like poinsettias, there's a charitable giving opportunity for poinsettias. So when you go on to the roster, check one off at least for some nice person in a retirement center. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick.
And Dick, I'll just add that last year we had the highest number of donated poinsettias for people in the retirement center. So that's great if the club could do that again this year.
I know personally, a lot of people I've approached have said, I don't want any poinsettias, but please, donate some on my behalf, and they've written checks. So that actually seems to be more popular than taking them home,
We're good.
for me at least. All right, any other announcements? Anybody on Zoom? The only announcement I can think of is to save the date for the holiday party for December 29th. That would be the 5th Wednesday of the month. And so we'll do the holiday party. It'll be, kind of a rah-rah, but it's a holiday party. So make sure you're planning for that. I think if there's no other announcements, then we're ready for our program. Our speaker today needs no introduction, and so I won't give him one. I'm just kidding. Doug Southgate is a longtime member of our club since 1995 and is professor emeritus from Ohio State University in their Department of Agricultural Economics. And today he's going to be discussing natural gas and whether cheap gas has gone for good or not. And I had to stop myself from making a joke about there being, full of hot air or something like that. So we'll just leave it at that. And Doug, it's up to you now.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. So what button do I need to hit share screen again?
Yes.
Okay. All good?
Yep, we can see you.
Okay. Can you see the slideshow?
Sure can.
All right, wonderful. That's more important. So let me just dive right in. This one thing I might add to Steve's introduction is that about 4 years before I retired in 2015. In 2011, I got involved in I became associate director. It was a part-time position at the university. The university was responding to shale energy development in the eastern part of this state. And so a lot of what I'm going to share with you stems from what I learned during those 4 years as associate director. What I'd like to do is go back and provide some historical context or a little of the history of why shale energy development occurred in the United States. And it's really a combination of our legal traditions. We have a tradition in this country of private ownership of underground resources. And it derives from English law. But what's interesting is that this tradition of subsurface resource ownership is not shared by Great Britain, Canada, and other countries with an English legal heritage. So we are unique. And the significance of this private ownership is that it creates a strong local interest for natural resource development. An interest that I can tell you from looking at shale issues in other countries, an interest that really doesn't exist in some of those countries, all throughout Europe, for example. So we have a tradition of private ownership, and then there was a policy change, a deregulatory policy change that took place not during the Reagan administration, but actually during the administration of Jimmy Carter. And a lot of people forget that there were some important deregulatory undertakings under Carter in the transportation field. For example, in railroads, airlines, trucking, all of those were substantially deregulated. And then there was something called the Natural Gas Policy Act of 1978, and the main consequential change here was a guarantee of equal access to all producers and all purchasers to the interstate pipeline system. So that system to this day is regulated as a public utility. Well, the Natural Gas Policy Act said that if there was an owner of gas deposits in one state and then a consumer of natural gas in another state, then they had equal footing as anybody else when it came to using the interstate pipeline system. Again, it was regulated as a public utility. But what the Natural Gas Policy Act did in particular was to create something that really doesn't exist any other place in the world, which is a competitive market by definition, one with many buyers and many sellers, and also a market of continental dimensions, at least in the lower 48 states. There's a little bit of an irony here. Jimmy Carter was quite concerned, quite interested in engineering, in energy, but he didn't have much confidence in natural gas. He thought that the energy future of this country lay with coal, not natural gas. He was pessimistic about future natural gas supplies for reasons, by the way, that will become clear when I show you some trends in production. He was right in a way, although he like practically everybody else in his day, didn't understand or didn't have any appreciation or understanding for the importance of shale gas. But we got a national market, and there were two outcomes, almost what should have been expected from having a competitive market of continental dimensions for natural gas. First of all, there was accelerated exploration. So large companies, small companies set out to find undiscovered resources, which they found. A lot of them couldn't be developed economically, but they found a lot of resources. But then also technological improvement. And this technological improvement was aimed at finding and extracting gas and other hydrocarbons, in particular contained in shale, as it was called back then, Devonian shale. And these shale deposits in general are deep underground, a mile or more. And they are actually the remnants of ancient ocean beds. And they're sort of the source rock of hydrocarbons, hydrocarbons that over geologic time, if I didn't say so already, let me say they're generally about 350 million years old. So they're ancient. And then over time, hydrocarbons have migrated up toward the surface and settled into other deposits, generally more accessible. And those other deposits are what historically the oil and gas industry would go after. The thing is, it's calculated that at least 90% of the hydrocarbons originally in shale are still in shale. These deposits have to do basically with decayed microbes that were caught in the muck at the bottom of the oceans, and they transformed into hydrocarbons. You'll have to excuse me. I never took a course in geology, as you can probably figure out by now. But the point is, shale, deep underground, historically, economically inaccessible, but the source of enormous, even staggering volumes of gas and oil. So the technological improvement that ensued in this continent-wide competitive market setting was keyed on getting at this major source of resources. There was an individual who really led the way. He, at enormous financial risk from time to time, he was the one who is responsible for the technology that we now call fracking, for getting at these shale resources. Fracking actually is a combination of some older techniques, I think so-called directional drilling, and that just means drilling down at an angle or going down a ways and then going out horizontally. That dates back by some counts to the late 1940s. So he combined George P. Mitchell, who that was not the name he was born with. He happened to be Greek American, and his family migrated to Galveston, and he went to Texas A&M. But he took this horizontal drilling and he combined it with hydraulic fracturing. So hydraulic fracturing is about injecting an aqueous or water-based solution with some other chemicals in it, chemicals typically that allow the solution to hold small fragments of sand in it. That's important for reasons I'll explain. Anyway, this solution, this aqueous solution, is injected at very high pressures into the rock that's being drilled into, and that creates fissures in the rock or minor cracks in the rock. The sand is important for keeping those cracks open, and as long as they're open, then the hydrocarbons can flow out. So that's essentially the fracking technology. So on top of that, I don't know if George P. Mitchell could have claim credit for this. There's also microseismic sensing. And I found out about this not long after I became associate director at the center at Ohio State. I took in a presentation by a PhD geophysicist who had his own microseismic company, and what he described was basically it's an underground sonar system. So you ping the rock, whatever is down there, and then you listen to the echoing, microseismic waves coming back to you. And that's what allows you to identify where promising resources are located. Anyway, to describe how advanced this technology of his company and others had become, he said, just imagine a solid concrete floor 10,000 feet below the surface below the land surface. And suppose I drop a can of Coke. Well, my daughter works for Heineken, so I prefer to think a can of beer. Drop that on the concrete floor. This microseismic sensing technology will pick up the reverberations. That's how precise it is. And as he described, and as others during the ensuing years, others in the industry told me, what this sensing technology does is eliminate the possibility of dry holes. They find hydrocarbons just about every time they drill. The drilling, by the way, is not very much like what Jed Clampett did back in his home in Appalachia. So if I need to dispel that notion right now. But anyway, they are incredibly precise. This is a high-tech undertaking, a high-tech industry, not least because of the microseismic. And then I was with some petroleum engineering professors visiting the headquarters of Chesapeake Energy in Oklahoma City a couple of years later, and they were astonished because they had put microseismic sensors on the fronts of drill bits, so they could guide the drill bits exactly where they wanted them to go, and they knew where they wanted to go. So our capacity for finding resources has been multiplied by the sensing technology, and then getting at the resources is possible thanks to being able to drill down a mile and a half to get to the shale, and then out a mile and a half or more to get at it, and then frack it or hydraulically fracture it and get the hydrocarbons out. So these are the technological advances that for which we have George P. Mitchell largely to thank. And his first successful commercial application of this technology was only 20 years ago in the vicinity of Dallas in the Barnett Play or shale formation of northern Texas. So that's the technology. Here's a schematic. So do you see my cursor moving in here? So here's the well, although I have to tell you, you have a big well on a drilling site only for a few weeks when they're boring down through the various layers of rock and then out. Once that's done and they have a flow started, they put really something that's no more than 8-10 feet tall there. It's pretty unobtrusive, and they're getting at resources. Just you can conceptualize this. They're getting resources for a mile around in every direction. Much less. This is nothing like mountain topping to get at coal or even all the windmills you see in farmland or on ridge tops and so forth. This doesn't disturb the landscape very much. And then here you see, here are the fissures in the rocks opened up by injecting the aqueous solution there, and then the hydrocarbons flow out. So the impact on gas supplies has been dramatic. This is a 9-year-old figure from the U.S. government Energy Information Agency, but I keep it because it shows the rapid the rapid development or the rapidly gaining importance of shale gas. You go back to 2000 and very little production of shale gas, and actually for a few years after Mitchell's projects. There was also tight gas. That is also an unconventional gas. It's these are limestone formations for the most part, and these days the tight gas is fracked as well. But here you see the more conventional sources. So you see conventional sources of natural gas losing importance over time. And I'll just continue this. These are more recent projections of gas production from shale and tight gas. That's all the green here versus various commercial resources. So I have to say, in a way, Jimmy Carter was right. What he knew about, what everybody knew about, I really shouldn't pick on Carter, were the trends in conventional gas production. And they have continued to go down. The big story with natural gas is the unconventional plays, starting with tight gas and now especially in from shales. In terms of shale production, so let's see, let's just look at the units of measurement here. So we're not quite, so as of 2020, we're producing a little less than 35 trillion cubic feet. So there are some numbers larger than our federal deficit. This is one of them. So 35 trillion. And of that, a little less than 25 trillion are comprise shale gas. So shale gas accounts for more than half of our supply. And here I want to show you something here. As some of you are familiar, I suppose, with the oil and gas industry from former years and are accustomed to thinking about it in terms of being concentrated along the Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana, and so forth. A really interesting and a significant development of the shale gas revolution is how much of this is coming from the East. And really, that production is centered in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Marcellus Shale, a couple of enormous centers of production there. The Marcellus also extends into Eastern Ohio as well as into West Virginia. But that's significant. We have diversified our supplies away from one place, and that brings I'll get to that. I want to talk about the consequences in just a minute. Ohio's shale development is more from another formation, the Utica Formation. And this is a map from a few years ago, and it's the formation, like all hydrocarbon resources, is heterogeneous. So you have the newer parts of the formation, immature, nothing really can be extracted. You're going to have to wait around for a few million more years for this to be commercially viable. But then a little bit older is the oil portion of this. So the Ohio over the last 10 years has seen an increase in oil production, and that's largely coming from the Utica. And then you get into wet gas, the ethane that goes into making ethylenes, which are feedstock for plastic production, and then dry gas, what so many of us, other than Don Moxley, burn in our homes. Okay, so market consequences. Well, relating to something I already observed, what that figure that showed you the geographic sources of shale gas in different parts of the United States. As long as our gas production was concentrated along the Gulf Coast, and furthermore, as long as our import terminals for liquefied natural gas, as long as they likewise were concentrated along the Gulf Coast, then U.S. prices for oil and gas were highly correlated. They were typically produced in conjunction with each other. So, but the prices used to move up or down in tandem. The last time these prices spiked together was in September 2008. I think actually the oil price spiked in June of 2008 at just a little shy of $150 a barrel, less in terms of today's dollars. But anyway, September 2008, I certainly have vivid memories of that month, because that's when Hurricane Ike came through. It came ashore in I think in the Corpus Christi area in Texas, and then moved up here. And I remember being without power for a week. So that was Hurricane Ike. And true to what always had happened with these big hurricanes that would hit what former Senator Mary Landrieu of Louisiana called appropriately the working coast of the United States. The hurricanes would hit the Gulf Coast, and price of natural gas would spike along with price of oil. And in fact, it spiked at more than 10 million British thermal units, which, by the way, a million British thermal units has about as much gas or energy as 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas. So $10, 1,000 cubic feet or a million BTUs. But that was the last time we had a spike like that. Gas prices subsequently came down and then stayed down. They were pretty stable at around $2.50 to $3 a million British thermal units. And this demonstrates something that I've studied with reference to the food economy, which is that technological innovation benefits producers. It brings down their costs of operation, but what producers, whether they're farmers or gas well owners, what they gain from lower costs of production, they mostly give back in the form of lower prices. The big winners then of technological innovation, whether we're talking about the food economy or the energy sector or anything else, the big winners are consumers who benefit in the form of low prices. They are the main beneficiaries from innovation in a competitive industry. Enormous economic and environmental stakes on this. The authority on the energy sector, the global energy economy. And he's written a number of books. Is Daniel Yergin at Harvard University. His most recent book is called The New Map. It came out a little more than a year ago. And he pointed out that the oil and gas sector accounted for more than half of all industrial investment in the United States between 2010 and 2019, so a 10-year period, and more than 40% of all industrial expansion in this country. So, as one politician might have put it, this is a big fracking deal. So also, there has been an enormous environmental stake, an enormous environmental benefit from this development in terms of lowering emissions of CO2. So our emissions of CO2 went down by 14% between 2005, which was the peak year for emissions, and 2019. So I'm not even talking about the further declines that have happened during the pandemic. Actually, so I just ran across this factoid this morning. Our emissions in 2020, which were artificially low because economic activity took an enormous hit, of course, but our emissions last year were at the same level as in 1983. Okay, now that was in part last year because of the pandemic, but before then, the 14% reduction traced almost entirely to electricity generators' substitution of natural gas for coal. So natural gas burns more cleanly. There are natural gas turbines that are incredibly efficient. They have various advantages even before you start counting the environmental benefits. But that is what has driven our reduction in emissions. By the way, and this is relevant in the context of Glasgow, the Glasgow summit. Our emissions are exceed total emissions from the whole EU, European Union, which has 40% more people than we do. Our reductions in emissions exceed what the EU has achieved by 17 million tons. And we've done way better than Japan. The United States is the world leader in eliminating greenhouse gas emissions by far. Let's see, other benefits, thanks to fracking. Well, this technology spread to the oil industry. And so this is what caused the United States to become one of the world's leading oil producers and even an exporter of small amounts of petroleum. It explains why North Dakota became the third largest oil producing state in the country. And among other things, that meant it saved us 400 billion, up to 400 billion a year in money that we otherwise would have spent for imported oil. That's what it was a little more. That's what the bill was a little more than 10 years ago. And this country now exports liquefied natural gas. Okay, so here is a description of trade. You can say basically our significant exports began around 2016. So here are the LNG exports going to Europe, primarily to Europe, to other countries. We also have some trade with Mexico and Canada. I can see, as I've told you before, when an economist says something's going to be short and clear, he or she is lying at least once. And so I have the sense that I'm running out of time, but here is an LNG tanker. So natural gas is a gas, of course. To transport it, you have to super cool it down into a liquid state, and then you can transport it, and then it goes to an import terminal where it is gasified again. So we have actually, I mentioned the import terminals along the Gulf Coast. One consequence of the shale revolution was to have a major conversion of those import terminals into export terminals, basically reversing their function. Bring this to a close. U.S. supplies. U.S. supplies are maybe throttled is too strong a word, but they are being restricted. And this is not to be political about it or anything like that, but the party now in power takes a dimmer view of fossil fuel development than the opposition party does. I think that's no secret. And in practical terms, the dim view of fossil fuel development manifests itself in terms of restricting this development on public land. So this is very consequential for the Western United States, where most land is owned by the federal government and where there are major untapped resources. So right now, the industry cannot get at those resources. Also, pipeline construction. I won't talk about the Keystone pipeline or about jobs and pipelines and so forth. I think that's sort of unfortunate. The point of this, as they say, the main thing is the main thing is the main thing. The main thing of natural gas is to give us cheap energy. It's not to create jobs. If we really wanted to create jobs, say in oil, we'd have bucket brigades extending from the fields out to consumers, but we don't do that. That's if you're really interested in jobs. Jobs are secondary as far as many of us are concerned. There are also financial impediments. You see the push from by officials, and then also by major investors like BlackRock. They want to see sustainable behavior by corporations. They want commitments even by energy companies for net zero emissions and so forth. The latest thing I heard either yesterday or the day before, the nominee to be the comptroller of the currency. So she's a law professor. Well, that's bad enough, of course, but she's She is a self-declared Marxist law professor, and she should know because she grew up in Kazakhstan and graduated from Moscow State University while the Soviet Union was still in business, and she's unrepentant. And earlier this week, she declared, well, to meet our climate goals, our sustainability goals, a lot of small oil and gas companies are going to have to go bankrupt. She makes no bones about it. Let's see. Now, so we have restricted supplies in the United States. Quickly, we have Europe's growing dependence on Russia and also Europe's attempts, not very successful so far, to escape that dependence. Opposition, it must be said in Europe, opposition to fracking is strong. Again, there are no landowners across the landscape who will go to bat to develop their own resources. And illustrative of the opposition is that the Dutch, where our daughter lives, the Dutch are closing down a major offshore gas field because some of the seismic activity that gas extraction costs. So that's the European approach. There are major shale deposits in Poland and other countries, and given the general European stance against fracking, those resources in Poland are undeveloped. Nuclear power has been phased out. 10 years ago, I had just started my sabbatical over in Germany, and Germany was phasing out nuclear plants after the Fukushima mishap earlier the same year. And wind and solar power have proved to be unsatisfactory substitutes for nuclear power and other conventional sources. What actually happened in Germany was that its imports of coal went up, including close to where we live, big coal generators, and then gas purchases from Russia. Now, the Europeans also constructed import terminals to diversify their supply sources away from Russia. But what's happening these days is that Europe is now competing against Asia, East Asia and South Asia, where there is a very strong demand for natural gas. The prices are just being bid up. Here is the Russian embrace. You look at these tentacles here. These are pipelines, the older pipelines that went through Ukraine. But the Russians want to stop going through Ukraine because they want to be able to shut off gas supplies in Ukraine again, as they did in 2009 and more recently in Moldova, which is right in here. And so that's the purpose of Nord Stream 1 and then Nord Stream 2. So in effect, earlier this year, since January 20th, the United States dropped all effective opposition to Nord Stream 2. So that will be a way for the Russians to sell natural gas to the Germans. The Germans are confident about being able to deal with a relationship with Russia. Second time, I suppose, in 82 years or so. So that's, this Russia. Russia is the major natural gas supplier in Europe. So we have constricted supplies in the United States, increasing international demand, which is important now that we export a large share of our natural gas production in the form of LNG. Prices have gone up. They've essentially doubled in the past year, from about $3 per million BTUs, which is what they had been for several years, going up to $5.50 a million BTUs as of last Friday. Given current weather forecasts, U.S. households according to the Wall Street Journal, U.S. households can expect to pay 30% more for natural gas this winter. And here is, here are some long-term projections. This makes me think of one of my favorite presidents, certainly my favorite Democratic president, who was Harry S. Truman. So he, and among other things, what I really appreciate, one of many things I appreciate about him is that he was the only U.S. president since the 1800s not to go to university. And yet he was a darn good writer. a good thinker, he was admirable in so many ways, but he also had this observation about economists. He said, well, I'd just like to have a one-armed economist. And his advisor said, well, why, President Truman? He said, well, I'm getting so tired of hearing, well, on the one hand and well, on the other. So that observation applies here. What direction will prices take in the future? Well, it really depends on exports. And so this is from the Energy Information Agency. And so they've come up with some base case scenario of constant exports starting in 2030. I don't know where that comes from. But then they also suppose, well, what if oil prices really shoot up? If oil prices really shoot up, then there will be a substitution of cheaper natural gas for more expensive oil in thermal generating plants. But if oil happens to become cheap, then you get the opposite effect. So these are the different scenarios of natural gas exports and prices. So we could, with the high oil price scenario, we would be back to essentially Hurricane Ike type prices, but more or less permanently. Or on the other hand, President Truman, prices would settle in at $3 a barrel, and we'd all be happy. So many economists end to end, and they don't reach a conclusion. But I have reached the end of my time. That's my presentation. I was just thinking, if there are questions, Steve, why don't you field them, and then I will respond as best I can.
Sure. Dick, go ahead.
I guess this is ancient history, but wasn't natural gas one time called nickel gas because it costs 5 cents a unit to heat your home?
I suppose because, it was just a byproduct of oil production. They would, they flared a lot of it off. It didn't have much value. Makes sense.
More interest in the last 20 years in that. And didn't Ohio tax legislation make the taxes very low on fracking and cost us lots of dollars because they didn't tax it properly?
I had a conversation with our former member, Mike Duffy, when he was in the state legislature. So when the shale development was getting underway, a lot of us, including yours truly, pointed out, well, we have low royalties. They didn't reduce taxes on fracking. They just applied the same royalties on fracking that already exists on oil and gas. That's more accurate to say. But it was pretty clear to here the economists all agreed. We thought that we could get away with a little higher with higher taxes on this. Interestingly, so Mike told me that representatives and senators from the eastern part of the state were just reluctant to take the risk on this. There was a lot of development, a lot of money going into that region, jobs being created, and so forth. And they just didn't want to take the risk on killing the goose that laid the golden egg. But I want to address another part of your question. Why natural gas? Now, it's this technology for electricity production, the natural gas turbines, and I think there's something like 65% efficient, which is way over the efficiency that you get from a standard coal-fired generator, and really much more efficient than the renewable sources as well. It is between the efficiency of that technology and the low prices that we had from this mammoth increase in supplies, that's the reason why for several years now, for every unit of installed capacity of coal-based production generation, for every unit that goes out of the coal-based capacity, there's 1 unit of natural gas capacity that comes in. It's a 1-to-1 substitution. It's just that efficient, Dick.
Hey Doug, I've been concerned since you started your presentation that the pounding on your roof wasn't because your use of natural gas and you blew off the roof or something.
No. Thanks for the concern, John. No, it's just major repairs on the roof today. They called us a day and a half ago. They said, well, do you want us? And they said, yeah. So, but my wife didn't want to be left here alone with the roofers. That's all. Although they're all perfect gentlemen.
This may be out of scope for this conversation, but you hear all this controversy about fracking in general, and there's a video going around, I think, of somebody lighting their faucet on fire from happened from fracking. What's your take on that?
Well, there's methane all over the place underground, and when you disturb things, I suppose you can get more instances of that. So one response, Steve, is that people in natural gas rich areas have always been able to do that. So if they're depicting this as something that's new that began with fracking, then that's it could be a distortion. It bears monitoring, and I'll put in a little plug for the center down at the university that I'm not sure still exists. It was hard to, they ended up getting me as an associate director. It was hard to get faculty who weren't down the line hostile toward conventional energy, right? So, but one reason why we established that center was to look at the environmental impact of this natural gas development, as well as economic and other consequences. So I remember, just to pivot a little bit, as they say in politics, and talk about another impact, which is the earthquakes. The first time I heard this, well, how can anything we do really set off earthquakes? Well, in fact, it happens. I think they've had problems up in Youngstown. I remember talking with Darnell about this a few years ago. The big problem there is with the disposal wells. So what comes out of the ground with hydrocarbons? So just think of 3 things coming out of the ground together in a lot of places: oil, natural gas, and then brine, reflecting the ancient geological origins of this resource. So you have this brine, which in the old days was just dumped in nearby streams. Well, that's not good. So now they re-inject it, and those are very, very deep wells. But if you have a place where the rock is not consolidated, some rock can move in one direction and other rock move in another direction, and then you get, not a huge earthquake, but definitely something you can feel. The earthquake evidently that prompted the movement to close the offshore gas field in the Netherlands, that earthquake was 3.6 on the Richter scale, which normally doesn't do certainly doesn't do significant structural damage, but you can feel it, and it could be a problem. I've been in a 7.2 earthquake, and that one we definitely felt, and I don't want to live through that again. So there are consequences of this. They need to be studied. That's why we had that center. There are consequences with every form of energy.
Sure. Any other questions? Doug, thank you very much.
Okay, my pleasure.
You didn't learn something from Doug today? I don't know what to tell you. There was a lot of good stuff. All right. Our speaker next week will be Nina Perini. I believe she's the executive director of an organization called Worthington Partnership. And she'll be talking to us about an update on the Worthington Merchants Association, which I'm hopeful means like she'll talk about the staffing issues that they're seeing. I don't know. come and find out with me. And so before we wrap up, we have a raffle. Mr. Paul.
We collected $34 and winner is 6082. Last four numbers, 6082.
Thank you, Darnell. Good call. Okay, so we have to choose a total. We take the total and we divide it
Okay.
There is some controversy about the total. Stand by. All right,
Okay, then
ace of spades. How much is in the ace of spades?
how much is in the ace of spades?
Was the total proceeds $34?
Yes.
Half of everything that's in this raffle goes to the club members. So half of that is $17. Is that correct?
Yes.
Half of 17 is what Darnell should have gotten, because the other half goes into the ace of spades.
Okay, I thought it was better.
No, we'll take it.
Easy come, easy go.
That's all right. And we won't ask you for a refund from last week.
Yeah.
But the rest of it, the other half, goes into our social fund. And that's what pays for your rah-rahs and partially holiday parties and installation and that sort of thing. And for some, the golf outing.
Thank you for clarifying
Yeah, you need it.
So another ticket for
Ace of spades.
Yeah. 6059.
6059.
All right.
Not quite a cigar.
Yeah, you hit that one time, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Hit it.
Is it lucky?
Jack of hearts. We're good.
All right.
Now to grow.
Now it can grow.
Okay, I
You
guess
ready
that,
for me to get out of your way?
no, just getting stuff ready. Takes us to the four-way test. All right, repeat after me. Of the things we think, say, and do, first.
Is it the truth?
Second.
Is it fair to all concerned?
Concerned.
Third.
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
And fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.
Doing good.